Susanna Mendonça reporting. Then we are joined by Dr. Madsen Pirie of the Adam Smith Institute. Now, it may be a long shot to say that Marxist ideology, the Marxist analysis of society is making a comeback, but the sense that the rich are another country, that they have brought a lot of badness in recent years, and the ordinary people are getting a rum deal, that has taken root.
It's prevalent at a popular level, but in fact, when Marx prophesied that the ultimate destiny of capitalism was to depress the condition and wages of the workers, he was 100% wrong. Capitalism has done more to lift the standard of living of the poor, of the common man, than any other force in human history. It's one of the most benign things that people have ever done.
Until now. In this country, where the average median wage is now back to where it was in 2003.
Which is very much further ahead than it was 10 years earlier. The point is that capitalism does have its occasional hiccups and its crises, but it's very resilient, it's flexible, and always we come back with a new and improved version and start generating wealth again.
But even on the right, you see an awareness of class politics. You know, Mr. Cameron is very uncomfortable about talking that he went to Eton. Mr. Osborne, the Chancellor, is anxious not to be seen as part of a coterie of well-off public school boys, Oxbridge educated and so on. There is, and every now and then on the Labour side you see a class rhetoric being thrown. The class in the Marxist sense is back as part of our politics.
It's not necessarily an equation with wealth. Class in Britain is something that's not quite the same as wealth. It's part of background, education, cultural choices. And there is, of course, Britons have always been obsessed with class, but it's not necessarily anti-rich. That's different. I don't mind.
But there is an anti-rich movement at the moment, isn't there?
Yes, and therefore, you know, people have to be taught the fact that when the rich get richer, the poor get richer too. And when a country has economic growth and everybody's getting richer, it's the best thing that could happen to poor people.
But the rich seem to have been getting richer in recent years and the rest haven't.
I'm not bothered about the income gap. What I'm concerned about is the absolute command of resources that poorer people in this country have. And it's capitalism that enables that to advance.
Does the gap not matter at all? Does there not come a time when the gap is just so big and the new rich, the new globalized rich, live a life and a style just totally beyond most people?
Well, it's part of the process of development that initially, when a country goes from relatively poor to affluent, part of the process involves income disparities increasing. This has been happening in China, and there are more billionaires in China than there are in America. And this inevitably affects the world figures. But the result will be that the ordinary people in China will benefit, as they have done spectacularly already in these last 2 decades.
Where are you on this?
Well, I agree capitalism isn't really going anywhere. I mean, you look at the current leader of the Labour Party, who is to the left of Tony Blair. He's repudiated a lot of New Labour Blairism. He was labelled Red Ed by the tabloids, and what he wants is a kinder, more gentle, more moral capitalism. So, but it's not really useful to discuss it in the terms of whether anyone actually is going to junk capitalism. This point about the super rich is a point about political consent. It gets very hard for a government to achieve things, do things, as we were discussing earlier in relation to the budget, if it's felt to be for the benefit of a very tiny number of people.
I suppose the fundamental question we're asking, though, do current conditions lead to a potential revival of Marxism or not?
Well, I'd be very dubious about what your Marxist in the film was saying there, because what I think he was saying was that Marxism is a very good way of articulating discontents, and it's very good at saying what doesn't work terribly well about the capitalist system at any time. Marx tried it in his time. The only problem with relying so heavily on Marx, by the way, is Marx predicted an awful lot of other things which didn't happen, as well as the things that he's claiming that he's vindicated about. So I don't really see where it takes you, because unless you're prepared to sign up to his agenda, or you want to support deranged autocrats, like Hugo Chavez, how do you bring it into the political system in a democracy? On the other hand, I do think, Madsen, I think you're a bit complacent to say it doesn't matter at all that you have this massive wealth gap, because it does make life much more difficult to put across a very good case for capitalism. And I think simply saying you're not interested in it isn't really particularly convincing to me.
What I was saying was that I don't think it is as important as people think it is. I think the important thing is to have economic growth, because people in an expanding society that see their future as being better off than their past are more likely to
But
be
they don't,
they're more
because
likely
the
to be
relative
happier.
gap. Yeah, because that's because you don't care about relative wealth, but a lot of people do, and they often do judge themselves against other people in the society.
Is this envy we're talking about?
No,
Yeah.
well,
Well, it is. I mean, actually, I think envy is a perfectly reasonable human response. So I wouldn't dismiss it in the way that you appear to do. So obviously, it's ridiculous if you want to stop anybody else getting on and earning. But if you do see a superclass pulling away from you, this is going to be a problem. Andrew mentioned China, that many, many countries are going to have.
You've got to remember-
I want to ask you this. As the left regroups post the crash of 2008 and tries to evolve policies for a post-crash world, which there will not be a lot of money around, are Marxists playing any role in that?
I don't think substantially they are, to be honest, for precisely the reasons that Anne says. I mean, one of the interesting point about that, the sort of tented village outside St Paul's Cathedral, isn't that it existed, but that actually so few people rallied to it, really. It wasn't a mass movement at all. And actually, but if you look at this point about what makes people cross and where political anger comes from, the stagnation of ordinary people's wages started in 2002, 2003. That was before the big crash. So this disparity that makes it hard to actually govern.
And earlier in the United States.
I'm speaking on behalf of ordinary middle-class people. It makes it hard to do that politically when you see a small number of people apparently taking more of the pie for themselves.
I mean,
that's bourgeois anger, that's not proletarian
Recent
anger.
years have seen a huge alignment of resources from labour to capital. Average wages have been stagnant for quite a while in this country, even longer in the United States. Some estimates suggest average real wages today in America are no higher than they were in 1973. Corporate profits have gone through the roof. There is something not quite functioning for the majority of people here.
It isn't that the balance has shifted away from wages and into profits. The difference has been made by taxation. It is government share that has increased, and that's what's, so to speak, made the difference between the two. It's not that profit has been taking a higher share at the expense of wages.
I think you'll find
it's that government
I think you'll
has.
find that share of profits as a percentage of GDP were higher by in recent years than they were in the 50s or the 60s.
Can I just say one thing? We are in a crisis of capitalism, people say, and yet no one is suggesting we go back to state-controlled central planning, nationalisation. And every time we have this hiccup, a crisis of capitalism, everyone says it's over, but always it comes back refreshed and renewed in a different form.
Right, on your optimism, from the Adam Smith Society's point of view, we'll leave it there. Dr. Pirie, thank you. Now, we all like to think that our views are the right ones, or the left ones, but can you tell someone's political views just by looking at their brains? Well, scientists